Hey there YouTube, it's been a while since I've done one of these videos. I am once again back at the small Middle Tennessee rural town of Morrison at their city park. They got one of those book boxes over there. I'll show you that in a minute. I've got another small pile of books. Kind of a mixed bag this time, and probably stuff that typically doesn't end up in a book box in rural Tennessee. So gonna put those in there, but before I did that I figured I'd give you the opportunity to stare at me as I talk about the things I'm going to be putting into that box. I don't know why you would want to stare at me while I do this, but it's what's going to happen. Feel free to click off. In fact, you probably should click off. So what do I got here? I got a stack of books here. I'm trying to think where to start with this. All right, let's start with this one here. Lloyd Kaufman, Make Your Own Damn Movie. Now, I'm a big fan of Troma. I would say more Troma than I probably should like. In fact, it's even the stuff that is painful to watch, I enjoy watching when it comes from Troma. Don't know why, it's probably some sort of deficit that I have, but I really, really adore Troma. And Lloyd Kaufman, when I was in my 20s, was like someone I really, really admired. I grew up outside of Pennsylvania. I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, and I moved to California. Primarily because I had a girlfriend that was out there, but in the back of my mind, it was also one of those things like, I'm going to make movies. I had these ideas that it'd be very easy just to go out to California and start making movies. And I bought this book because there is some actually good advice in here. This is not a bad book. I'm not getting rid of any of these things necessarily because they're bad, but they're things I'll never read again. So that's why I'm getting rid of them. This is a pretty interesting book. Lloyd Kaufman has a very fun sense of humor. His, I guess, worldview is interesting. His he's a caricature of himself, and that caricature comes through quite clearly in this book. If you like Troma, if you like Lloyd Kaufman, or if you're just someone that, I think some of the advice in here probably still applies today, even though everything has completely changed. Maybe the aspects of his work ethic and determination, and doing things cheaply and setting your bar for perfection pretty low when you're starting out, all that kind of stuff. I think it still could maybe possibly inspire some people reading this book. So this is not bad at all. I read it once. I'll never read it again because once I got to California, I realized how absurd it is to assume you could just go to California and start making movies. I was in my 20s. I didn't know any better. I know better now. So that is that. Next up, Bob Newhart. I shouldn't even be doing this, and I would agree with that. He probably shouldn't have been doing this when he wrote this book. I don't know. I've got all of Bob Newhart's LPs, his comedy LPs, and they're okay. They're not bad. I went through a phase of really just collecting as much 1960s and early 70s comedy records as I could find. Bob Newhart was one of those guys that he was on a major label, and I guess kind of like all of them were for the most part. And his stuff is just everywhere. You can go to any thrift store and you're going to find a Bob Newhart LP in a bin. So I collected them, and they're fine. And I like dry humor quite a bit, so his dry sense of humor is interesting. But the whole like phone gimmick thing, I don't know who was first, but Don Knotts has a comedy album. I think it was from like 63, 64, 65, somewhere around that era. Well, he's doing the same gimmick with the phone conversation stuff. You know, like, you only hear one side of the conversation, so you have to use your imagination to infer what the other party is saying, and it's mostly just Bob, or Don, in that case, reacting to it. At any rate, this book is, I don't even know if I finished it. I bought it just out of curiosity, more or less. I can't say I'm a Bob Newhart fan, really. I think I like the idea of Bob Newhart more than I actually like the creative works of Bob Newhart. His sitcoms, the first one that he did with, was it Elizabeth Platten? I think that was her name. His wife in Chicago was all right. And I do remember Richard Boner was the dentist, the guy that played the dentist, or for whatever reason, always portrayed as somewhat seedy or unreliable characters, but the actor's name was Richard Boner, and I'll never forget that because that was just funny to me every time his name came up in the credits. I do remember him. That show was all right. The second one he did where he had that Airbnb, it was like in Vermont or someplace like that, New England states. I didn't care for that so much. He had those three local guys that were kind of funny. That was kind of the only funny part of the second sitcom, were those three. Were they all named Doug or something like that? They all had the same name. I forget what it was. I haven't watched that show in probably 25 years. Didn't care for it as much. I'm rambling about Bob Newhart. More words have been spent talking about Bob Newhart than personally I think the guy deserves. Sorry to say it. Now, as far as comics that I think do deserve a lot of words, Steve Martin. This book is fantastic. It's even, I bought the hardcover. I did get it at 30% off, as all of these sort of comedy books ended up being discounted heavily after like the first month they were out. This is a fantastic book. I'm a huge Steve Martin fan. I think he's one of those guys that really just broke new ground, was completely creative. Like I said earlier, I like dry comedy, but I'm also a big fan of, I guess what would be called alternative comedy. Emo Phillips being my favorite comedian of all time. I think Steve Martin paved the way for all of those guys. Gallagher as well. I do like Gallagher too, but Steve Martin was just unique. The act that he put together, he kind of had one act. Okay, being charitable, saying that he's a bit very influential, but really he had like maybe in his entire stand-up career like 90 minutes of material. And he just did it over and over again in different venues and different settings and stuff like that. So I don't know. I love Steve Martin though. I think he's just one of the greats. And this book is good. It talks all about his upbringing, his rise to stardom. Everyone battles with anxiety and stuff like that in the comedy world. He talks about that as well. And anyways, this is a good one here. I think of all the books I'm going to be putting in the box, this might be the one that most people in rural Tennessee would identify with, because as I've been sitting here, as soon as I sat on this picnic table, someone pulled up in a really rundown car and went into the book box and took some stuff out. I didn't want to interfere with them or anything like that. So I waited to start the video until that person came and left. And he was an older gentleman. And I think most of the people that take books out of this book box are probably my generation or older. So they'll know Steve Martin. They might know Bob Newhart too, but something about Steve Martin, his wackiness. He was able to empathize with people from all classes, I guess you could say. I don't know. I'm getting myself in a weird territory even bring that up. All right, next one. Graham Hancock. Goodness gracious, this dude. Okay, this book is really compelling, and I think it's just as compelling now as it was when I first read it. I read this probably 3 or 4 times. That's how much I really enjoyed Fingerprints of the Gods, and it's one of those books that really made me think. This is thick. This is one of the thicker books I've ever read, because I don't like reading a lot of thick books. Essentially, you have to know Graham Hancock now, because the guy has just been all over. I think since the first time he went on Joe Rogan, his popularity has just soared. And that's when I started to really kind of despise the guy. He's one of those authors or journalists. He considers himself a journalist more so than an archaeologist. He's one of those journalists that, I don't know. He should have never been on camera. There's something about seeing him. I don't like, there's someone behind me right now. I see them walking behind me. I don't like very anemic, sort of like feeble Mother Teresa types. And he really gives off Mother Teresa vibes. He was on recently the Diary of a CEO podcast, Stephen Bartlett's podcast. I watch all this stuff. Forgive me, it's a waste of my time. I know ultimately it is a waste of my time. But anyways, he was on Steve Bartlett's podcast, and he just made a point to pull out a photo of him with his wife from Africa. He's got a interracial marriage, and that's fine. But it's just the fact that he has to display it in terms of giving himself credibility that he's not a racist. That kind of stuff just rubs me the wrong way. And he has that comes out in his on-camera interviews. It always has that aspect of his personality. And apparently he's on like death's door right now. The more controversy that's leveraged against him, the more he complains about his health and all that kind of stuff. If you've got a theory, stick to the theory. Keep your baggage, I guess. Quit using your baggage as a shield. That's probably the best way I could say it. He uses his personal problems and baggage as a defense mechanism against people that criticize his theories, which there's nothing wrong with his theories in Fingerprints of the Gods. Essentially, the gist of this is that I don't want to say Atlantis because that's just like a buzzword, but a lost civilization, could be Atlantis, it could be anything, did exist, and the people that founded that culture inspired all of the ancient cultures of the earth. And the homeland of those people is essentially Antarctica, which is covered in ice right now. There are, certain satellite images that kind of look like there could be structures under the ice, et cetera, et cetera. But his theory is that the climate of the earth has shifted because the crust of the earth, I remember his analogy is like the crust of an orange, where the center of the orange, the fruit of the orange, can rotate or spin independent of the crust atop it. And he thinks that at one time Antarctica was much more of a semi-tropic climate that allowed people to flourish there. Interesting theory. There is some evidence to all that. There's very unique similarities between all the ancient civilizations across the planet. The way they built, the things they built, the way they aligned things to the stars, a lot of their traditions and their myths are all very similar. So I think there's some credence to that idea. Just stick to it and give everybody else the finger. Don't be so defensive, Graham Hancock. His personality is what caused me to dislike him. If he just made this one book, and maybe the Mystery of the Sphinx, which he wrote as well, I think that was an interesting book as well, and then just stopped, he would have been someone that I maintain respect for. All right. Now, speaking of certain types of personality traits, Ayn Rand. Okay. I don't even know. I'm going to try my best to be pithy when I discuss Ayn Rand because I had a girlfriend once who was deeply into this Ayn Rand stuff. Like her whole worldview was built around it. And there's a lot of people like that. That's not necessarily in itself a bad thing. And I don't want to say that the whole objectivist, it's almost like a cult. It's not a cult. That's unfair to call it a cult. But that society, if you will, is really just horrible, disgusting people. I can't stand anyone involved in that. But back then, this was like this would have been like the late 90s, end of the 90s into the early 2000s. She asked me to read Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's most famous novel, and I read it, and I didn't like it, but I liked some of the ideas behind it. As a fiction writer, Ayn Rand is just indigestible to me. Her writing style, it just rubs me the wrong way. She's far, far too lengthy. She repeats herself over and over again. And she doesn't understand, I guess this same criticism could be leveraged to people I like and even to myself, but she doesn't understand subtlety. I think sometimes let me rephrase that. I'm sure she understands subtlety. She chooses not to demonstrate subtlety. I think that her ideas would have been more readily absorbed into the culture if she didn't beat people over the head with them page after page after page. I mean, Atlas Shrugged is like twice as long as Fingerprints of the Gods, and I actually read it. I skimmed parts of it, but I read the majority of it. And it could have been a short story, in my opinion. It could have been something that was done in 20 or 30,000 words max. So that's Ayn Rand's fiction. I don't like her fiction at all. I can't stand it. I read The Fountainhead as well, and I think I liked it less than Atlas Shrugged. At least Atlas Shrugged had like the whole secret society thing going on. Lost Horizon, I've spoken about that. Well, I've spoken about Lost Horizon in other videos I've made on the Czar's Top Shelf because one of my favorite, if not my favorite band, I don't know, it's up top 3 favorite bands is called Lost Horizon. And they weren't inspired by the Lost Horizon novel or the film in any way, but the Lost Horizon novel and the film, which talks sort of about a secret society, in this case it was in the Himalayas, Shangri-La. I think Ayn Rand picked up a lot of her ideas from that. I'm not so sure she would admit that, but the similarities are there's a little bit too many similarities. It's not plagiarized. Atlas Shrugged is a unique work of art. It is a work of art. I said that. Okay, so how do I know it's a work of art? The Ayn Rand lexicon. I'm going to try to dissuade myself from rambling on and on and on. This is like a dictionary of all of the terms that Ayn Rand uses over and over again, and it allows people to sort of get an understanding of what she means when she says certain words. Kind of a unique thing. I think if anyone considers himself a philosopher, which she did consider herself a philosopher, having something like this is a good thing, because you got to establish a baseline of what you're talking about, and this does that very well for objectivism. But at any rate, like, her definition of art is one that I agree with. Her definition of art is, I'm going to summarize it, a selective recreation of reality based on one's own values. And by that standard, almost anything could be art. Whether it's good or bad art is where you decide, make that decision. So you could say that a picnic table is art if all you care about is having a structured place to sit that is accommodating to your needs, and it has a certain aesthetic shape, it's symmetrical or whatever. You could call a picnic table art. Is it high art? No. Is it necessarily valuable art? Does it do anything to foster a certain worldview for somebody? No. Does it change the way someone feels and affects their emotions? No, not necessarily. So Atlas Shrugged is a work of art. I just don't necessarily think it's a good work of art. I think a lot of her ideas behind it are good. Most notably, the idea that selfishness is a virtue. That's something that I understood well, a decade before reading Atlas Shrugged. I knew that. I remember writing something about that in 10th grade high school. I wrote something about selfishness being a virtue. And I remember even for the teacher, it was some kind of like creative writing exercise we had. I remember even diagramming like something that looked like a net or like a spider web or like in grade school they would have that thing with a parachute. You would lay it down and then everybody would go around the parachute and you'd pull it up and down and have things on it bounce around. That they probably don't do that anymore. We did that when I was in like kindergarten and stuff. But like that sort of taut surface that's all being pulled from all different angles, making it something that can withhold other things. I remember drawing that out for my teacher and saying, look, everybody is pulling. They all have some selfish desire, and it's that selfish desire that creates a foundation for other things to be sustained atop it. And I don't know what my teacher thought of that. I don't remember. I wish I still had it. But I remember doing all that when I was in 10th grade. And then when I was in I guess I would have been 22, 23 years old when I read Atlas Shrugged. I remember saying, oh yeah, this lady has a lot of my same ideas. This is the way I thought about it. So I liked her ideas, and I like some of her nonfiction. I don't have Atlas Shrugged anymore. I don't know what happened to it. I must have given that away a long time ago. Same thing with The Fountainhead. I gave that away a long time ago. The thing that she had written that I liked the most was called The Romantic Manifesto. And it was a book very similar to this one here, where it's the same size, and it was just a collection of her essays. I think her essays are more interesting than her fiction. And it was all about art. And her view of art, I don't like at all. She has no room for fantasy in her view of art. She despises fantasy or anything that is supernatural and again, it comes back to her inability to convey subtlety. I think that's where fantasy is strongest, is you can slip ideas into people's brains through fantasy without them realizing it. Whereas in fiction, it's with like straight fiction or contemporary fiction or modern day fiction, whatever the word is, it's blatant, and she was very blatant. She took a hammer to people rather than a scalpel, I guess. The Romantic Manifesto I liked a lot, and I probably would still hang on to that book if I had it, but that's a book that I gave away in trying to woo a girl in Salt Lake City one time who was all into art and stuff like that, and I was trying to get this girl to go out with me, and as a pathetic attempt to convince her of my intellectual prowess, I gave her a copy of that book, and I don't think she liked it, and we didn't talk after that. So it's probably the book that ruined my chances, which is probably for the better because it was a dead end anyways. So yeah, that's what the Ayn Rand lexicon is about. Just to give you an example, I'm just going to pull this. Let's see what we got here. Okay, boom. All right, I opened it up. Look at that. I opened it up to music. That was just purely by chance. And then you could see that there's excerpts. It gives you like a brief, you can't see that. It gives you a brief definition, and then it goes into like several excerpts from her essays about what music is. And the brief definition, how Ayn Rand defines music, is it is that which employs the sounds produced by the periodic vibrations of a sonorous body that evokes man's sense of life emotions. I think that's a fair definition of music. I would be a little bit more general, though. I don't think music has to evoke emotional responses. My definition of music has always just been organized sound, because I think walking down the street, the shuffling of your feet at a certain rhythmic manner produces music. Drumming on your desk as a kid in school, that's music, whether Ayn Rand would agree with it or not. I don't think it has to have some sort of epic claim to it. It's just organized sound. And maybe that's because I'm a retired electronic musician who, composed a lot of stuff with samples from different places. Maybe that's why I view it that way. But anyways, that's what this book is about. This is interesting for anyone that's going to go in this book box. No one here is going to pay attention to this, but it might give someone something to think about. And then finally, Philosophy, Who Needs It? I read this one once. Again, it's a collection of her essays. I may have read this twice, actually. Come to think of it, I think I did read this twice. And like I said, I do like her nonfiction better, but she did consider herself a philosopher. And her followers, and I mean followers in more of a literal sense, not like Instagram followers, like true followers. Like I said, the people that are into this objectivist stuff, especially today, man, they're like the worst. But what was I saying? Yeah, this is like for people that are wanting to get an introduction to her philosophy of objectivism. And for that purpose, it's good, I guess. I can't imagine anyone reading this and being like converted, to her view, or sense of life is the phrase she always used. Rather than like worldview or something, she always said sense of life. I can't imagine someone reading this and being converted to her sense of life. This is really, this is designed for people that are already familiar with her work and just want something to supplement what they already know, I think, possibly. Well, 1982 is when this was first published, but I know this wasn't published. This was I don't think these covers are from the 1980s. They could be. I don't know. But I've always liked the cover art. There's the whole series. The Romantic Manifesto had the same sort of cover. This kind of like airbrushed, geometric Greek sort of stuff I really like a lot. And I'm working on my third book in the very, very beginning stages of it. But I do want to have a cover that sort of resembles this sort of... I mentioned this in my video about my third book. It's going to be called Christos. Christos. I use a Greek name for it. I don't speak Greek. I like gyros. I don't even pronounce gyro correctly. I know it's pronounced some sort of phlegmy way, like gyro, or some ridiculous way of pronouncing it. I call it a gyro. It's like a gyroscope. It's a gyro. I don't do anything Greek in real life, but I like the whole kind of Greek aesthetic. I'm culturally appropriating Greek. As a Slav, I'm a Slavic guy. There's not a whole lot of similarities between Slavic culture and Greek culture. So here's this pile of books. Let me show you where I'm at. You may not have seen these videos before. Let me just give you a quick pan around, then we'll put it in the box and we'll see what else is in the box. This is a very long video. So this is Morrison City Park, playground, big field over there, train tracks on the other side of that field. No nets or anything. It's just one of those fields that you just go out there and stand, I guess. Like typically like in a big field, there'll be like a soccer net or baseball batting cages or something. It's just a field. And there's a shed probably where the mower is kept. And then right over there is the book box. We're going to put that stuff in there, and you can see there's another little picnic table and a swing and stuff like that, and houses right across the street. So it's a nice little park, and this is a nice little town. In fact, most of Middle Tennessee is a nice little place. I like it here quite a bit. But at any rate, let's get this over to the book box and see what we got. That person that was making laps behind me appears to have left, so that's a good thing. There's actually more in here than there has been in the past. That's a lot. But let's see what's in the blessings box first. So we got, again, people put perishable items in here. That's like cottage cheese and yogurt. It's going to be about 95 today. Terrible idea. And then some Pepsi. Diet Pepsi, I guess that's a plus. Or there could be a negative, depending on how you feel about artificial sweeteners. Let's see what we got inside here. All right, I gotta say, there is hope. These mangas are surprisingly interesting. I had a collection of the smaller X mangas. Yoshiki was just on Billy Corgan's podcast. Of all the things, I never would have imagined the guy from the Smashing Pumpkins in the late 90s would have a podcast and Yoshiki from X Japan would be on it. This is actually really good. And it must be a library thing because it's got a barcode. But this is a find for someone. This is very unique for the area. There's hope, actually. Don't Know What the Heaven Is by Aphroditio. What if Jesus had never been born? And then we got some coloring books. What to Expect When You're Expecting. This is probably relevant. Another religious one. I put this in there last time. The World of Carl Pilkington. No one ever took it. In fact, look, my Carlology is still in here too. So they took some of the Carl Pilkingtons. I think I put 5 or 6 of them in here. Live Healthy Years Longer. Widow to Widow. Thoughtful Practices for Rebuilding Your Life. Another, well, it's practical for this part of the country. The Guernsey Literary and Potato. I don't know what that is. What to Expect. Another one about pregnancy. Survival Story. Unexpected Everything by Morgan Matson. I'm not familiar with this at all, but again, it's a New York Times bestseller, so it must be good. Utmost for His Highest, another religious one. Growing Up in Heaven, another religious one. The Last Juror by John Grisham. I know John Grisham. Lee Child, Jack Reacher. Bloom. Oh, okay, yeah, so I know a lot of people are a fan of these Jack Reacher books, so that's pretty good. And then down here we got some more kids stuff. Catastrophes, Egypt, Earth, Revolutionary War. It's 4th of July coming up tomorrow, so this is kind of relevant. Let's go ahead and put, I'm surprised there's so much in here. I'm going to just move these other kids ones down here. I don't want to cover everybody else's stuff up. There's way more in here than there ever has been. If you've seen these other videos I've done, there's usually like 3 or 4 books in here. I'll put mine up on this shelf. All right, Fingerprints of the Gods, Steve Martin, Ayn Rand, Bob Newhart, Mr. Lloyd Kaufman, and another Ayn Rand. And this is the last of my Ayn Rand. I've got no more Ayn Rand in my house, and I'm very grateful for that. I want no part of the objectivist people. They're terrible, terrible. They have terrible taste in everything. Everything they like stinks. Their interest in music, if it's not like something from some old dead person like Beethoven or whatever, they jump from like Beethoven to Phil Collins, and they still adore Phil Collins for whatever reason. And Rush, I guess because Rush did the one album that was inspired by, I think, The Fountainhead. They like that sort of stuff, like very, very selective prog rock, and they would consider like Phil Collins solo material, like Susu Studio is prog rock. They like all that, and then they skip from like that period and they go all the way up to Taylor Swift, and a lot of them adore Taylor Swift. And when it comes to fiction, those people are terrible too, because like I said, they don't like anything that's fantasy based. I'm giving her a hard time because she's not here to defend herself, and we only know what Ayn Rand thought about things based on what she wrote. And like I said, she was very explicit about what she wrote, so there's not a lot of guesswork in what she thought about things. But how could I say this? Her logo was the $sign. Like that is literally her logo. That's the height of everything she cares about. If it were to be summarized with a shape or a symbol, she said it would be the $sign. And that's really the heart of her problem, as far as I'm concerned. There's so many other more meaningful methods of acquiring wealth than money. I don't want to, there's no way for me to, I won't even get into it, but just do a little bit of investigating into her background, and it might help you understand why the $sign is her, is the pinnacle of her purpose, is the $sign. Anyways, I'm going to end this video with a shot of this porta potty in honor of Ayn Rand, which is surprisingly clean in here. I don't know who's responsible for it. I'm actually proud of how clean that porta potty is. That's it. So like I say all the time, If you watch this video to the end, you are in fact defective, but I appreciate your defects. That's it.